This is my,
Wife.
10 untold secrets inside Elizabeth Montgomery's crazy sex life. Get ready to uncover the scandalous secrets lurking within the sheets of Hollywood's darling Elizabeth Montgomery. Today, we're spilling the tea on 10 untold secrets inside Elizabeth Montgomery's crazy sex life that will leave you bewitched and begging for more. Number 10. President John F. Kennedy. Let's start with the name that needs no introduction, President John F. Kennedy. That's right, Elizabeth reportedly had a close friendship with the notorious president for sure, as both took those secrets to the grave. Now, we're not saying he's a philanderer himself, but did their relationship go beyond friendship? Well, we'll never know. She's a gold digger, but she only messed with people of fame and money. You can say everyone in Hollywood does that, but not everyone goes after the president himself. And this time, Montgomery's eyes were set on John F. Kennedy. Say it's not so, JFK. In the early 60s, she became a close friend of President John F. Kennedy. Although Kennedy was a notorious philanderer, both he and Montgomery went to their graves without speaking about being romantically linked. Kennedy chased almost every beautiful woman he met, though if anything happened, Elizabeth never spoke about it. That is how you do it. You do not kiss and tell, especially with the president. However, she and Asher were close friends with Kennedy. They were friends with JFK. Asher produced Kennedy's birthday bash where Marilyn Monroe sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President. It was a very hard time for everybody. Kennedy was assassinated only hours after the first Bewitched rehearsals took place in 1963.
Sam, where are you? Come out here and face me.
Yes?
You've been sticking that magic nose of yours where it doesn't belong again. Don't try to deny it.
All right, I won't.
Come on, Sam. Don't make me drag it out of you. Just... You admit it?
I only did it to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life.
Number 9. Gary Cooper. As the further along you get in this video, you will see a common theme of Montgomery being involved with other men who are not hers and possibly in another marriage. This mishap occurred with Gary Cooper, and it happened on the set of a movie they were working on together. When Elizabeth Montgomery starred in her first Hollywood film, The Court-Martial of Billy Mitchell, opposite heartthrob Gary Cooper, it turned into a disaster for her personal life. Gary Cooper had a thing for her. Despite the fact that she was still married to Camon, Cooper was her kryptonite, a dashing older man. Before long, Montgomery and Cooper were reportedly hot and heavy with each other, and were so flagrant about it that a crew member once caught them in Cooper's dressing room red-handed. But these carefree romps had massive consequences. As you might have guessed from her jumping right into bed with her first Hollywood co-star, Montgomery was miserable at home. The writing was on the wall. Within a year, the marriage was over. Now that she was a free woman, she ramped her life right up. Number 8. Dean Martin. Dean Martin was smitten with her when they filmed Who's Been Sleeping in My Bed. He was a romantic and loved women. And again, for Elizabeth, there was the attraction of an older man. Elizabeth Montgomery's public romances with Dean Martin were highly publicized, and these relationships provided fodder for the tabloids and helped to cement Montgomery's status as a Hollywood icon. Montgomery's relationship with Martin began in the early 1960s. The two were co-stars in the film Who's Got the Action and quickly became romantically involved. Their relationship was passionate and tumultuous, and it often made headlines. Martin was known for his hard drinking and womanizing ways, and Montgomery was often seen as his long-suffering girlfriend. Despite the challenges, Montgomery and Martin's relationship lasted for several years. They eventually broke up in 1965, but they remained friends until Martin's death in 1995.
Somewhere there's a someone for everyone.
Number 7. Elvis Presley. At the height of her stardom, Elizabeth Montgomery had it all. a successful career as a television sitcom star, beauty, and an undeniable charm that many famous men reportedly fell victim to. There was another huge name that had the hots for Montgomery. Not just any big name, but one of the biggest. His name was Elvis Presley. He might not have been the older type that she preferred, but hey, he was one of the kings of music, so he gets a pass. 3 years before Bewitched, Elizabeth Montgomery tried to be Elvis's female lead in Blue Hawaii. Joan Blackman got the part. Blackman also got the female lead in Kid Galahad, Elvis's boxing movie. Elizabeth's actor husband, Jig Young, would get a co-starring role in it. When Elvis found out that Elizabeth tried to get the Blue Hawaii role, he became interested in her, but she was married. However, Elvis pressed the studio to get her a part in one of his movies. When asked why, Elvis said, "I'm very envious of Liz's husband Gig being married to her, and if she were single, I would certainly like to meet her." Liz's response was, "I think Elvis is very attractive, and yes, if I was single, I would date him. He's not quite my type, but who knows what it could lead to. Let's face it, what girl wouldn't want to date Elvis? I do want to work with Elvis one day, if the studios would let me." These remarks would lead to real boxing on the boxing movie set. According to reports, Montgomery fell for the hound dog singer on the set of the 1962 film Kid Galahad. Though she wasn't part of the project, Montgomery would stop by the set often to visit her then husband, Gig Young, who starred opposite Presley in the movie. During her visits, Montgomery and Presley would allegedly flirt with each other, which didn't sit too well with Young. Elvis Presley was closer to her age when they co-starred in Kid Galahad, but he wanted her, Pilato revealed in his book. Her much older husband got upset when he saw Elvis flirting with her on set, but Presley called him an asshole. When Gig Young saw his wife and Elvis deeply involved in conversation, Young went into a rage and grabbed his wife and started slapping her. Elvis stepped in and stopped it. No wonder the yelling scene in the movie between Elvis and Young was so good. Elvis said, "I was getting fed up with that guy that I felt like it wasn't worth finishing the picture, but I did." I would often hear Gig giving Elizabeth some verbal abuse, but I didn't interfere. I just hope that one day she will come to her senses. I'm just glad that the filming is finished. Personally, I never want to work with Gig Young again. After the movie finished, convinced that Liz had an affair with Elvis, Young's anger got so intense with Liz that he packed his bags, left the house, and they got divorced. Although both Presley and Montgomery were notorious flirts, it was never revealed whether or not they actually dated. But even if they did, their relationship would have been short-lived, as Montgomery married director-producer William Asher in 1963, a year after Kid Galahad was released. Though we're pretty sure the relationship between Montgomery and Presley remained platonic, we can't deny that the two would have been a powerhouse couple had they given romance a try. Here we are again, adding to the list of men she got down with. Maybe Elvis did not have an abusive trait with him. He is the very rare exception.
Excuse me. Vanessa, come in, please. Vanessa, this is my,
Wife.
wife.
Number 6. Alexander Goodoff. Among her most tormented lovers was former ballet star Alexander Goodoff, who became a successful actor with films that include Witness and Die Hard. He was an alcoholic, and she was drawn to him, perhaps hoping to rescue him. But he was abusive and self-destructive. Elizabeth had an affair with him while with the man who became her fourth husband. Montgomery's life with live-in boyfriend Foxworth was likely like working on Bewitched, safe and predictable. So, who would lure Montgomery's wandering eye this time? Enter Russian ballet dancer Alexander Goodoff, whose defection from Russia was so dramatic it even involved then-President Jimmy Carter. Well, Montgomery met Goodoff and they started a passionate affair. This was a first for Montgomery. Well, it wasn't the first time she cheated, but was her first younger man. Yes, Montgomery had finally changed her pattern. She was through with older men. Hurrah! Except for one thing. Her younger boyfriend wasn't any better than the older guys. Most importantly, he had a drinking problem. Their love affair burned hot, but it burned out fast. Now, older and wiser, Montgomery dumped her boozy dancer and went back to reliable Foxworth. When Montgomery split from Goodoff, he fell into a downward spiral. Montgomery lost touch with Alexander Goodoff, but a morbid coincidence brought them back together. The same day that Montgomery passed, there was a gruesome discovery. Goodoff's doctor sent a nurse to check on him, but when she entered his apartment, she stopped in her tracks. There was the dancer's lifeless body. Goodoff had been lying there for close to a week, and no one had noticed. However, Goodoff wasn't Montgomery's only ex to meet a disastrous end. He lost himself in an alcoholic haze, says a Hollywood insider. He eventually drank himself to death.
Who's Henry?
You're going to feel awfully foolish. Major Tibbs' little boy.
Oh, I see. Little Henry Tibbs, huh? The boy with the long, long arms?
I thought he was standing on a stool. You know my stepmother.
Of course I do. How are you, ma'am?
Hello.
Number 5, Fred Camon. Her first husband was New York socialite Frederick Camon, whom she met while filming a TV show. The 1954 marriage to whom seemed to have come out of nowhere. Still, Robert Montgomery was thrilled because Frederick was the same age as Elizabeth. But he wanted her to quit acting and be a stay-at-home wife in New York, and Elizabeth had ambition. She soon took off for California, and a career and their marriage went south. They divorced a year later. Camon was a complex and troubled man. He was an alcoholic and had a history of mental illness. Montgomery later said that she married him because she was attracted to his vulnerability. However, the marriage was doomed from the start. Camon was often jealous and possessive, and he would frequently physically abuse Montgomery. But the first sign of trouble could have come a month later when Frederick found his social standing changed when the new edition of the Social Register was published. Some of society's ranking favorites were voted out, reported the Oakland Tribune, and a number of newcomers were added. Frederick Camon's name is missing for the first time since his childhood, apparently because of his marital troubles. Camon finds himself on the outside looking in after his marriage to the actor's daughter. On August 11, 1955, the New York Daily News reported, actress Elizabeth Montgomery was back at work today after winning a Nevada divorce from New York TV producer Frederick Camon. Ms. Montgomery charged cruelty in her divorce action yesterday at Las Vegas. The couple were married in March 1954 when Camon was working on the Robert Montgomery Presents TV show. Said Frederick, "She thought her career demanded that she head back to Hollywood, and I didn't see how I could fit in out there." Despite the difficulties of her first marriage, Montgomery was able to use the experience to inform her acting. She drew on her own experiences of love, loss, and heartbreak to create some of her most memorable performances. Montgomery's first marriage was a formative experience in her life. It taught her the importance of self-reliance and strength. It also gave her a deep understanding of the human condition, which she used to create some of her most iconic roles.
You make my heart to flutter most people.
Number 4, Gig Young. It wasn't long before she was walking down the aisle again, this time with actor Gig Young, who would go on to win the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for 1969's They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Her second husband was the Oscar-winning movie star Gig Young, some 25 years her senior, and at 48, almost her father's age. Her father was horrified. As happy as Robert Montgomery had been with Frederick, that's how annoyed he was about this pairing. She cared about her father, Herbie says, but she definitely zinged him a couple of times. If she knew something bothered him, she would do it. The thing is, Gig Young was a handsome, talented, and successful older actor, pretty much Robert's age. Robert Montgomery wigs out, and she loved it. After a broken engagement to Elaine Stitch, Gig met Elizabeth Montgomery on a blind date in 1955. Gig was the host of the television series Warner Brothers Presents, and Liz made an appearance on the show in an episode entitled Siege in 1956. Elizabeth was 22 and infatuated, but Gig Young was an alcoholic, emotionally abusive, and probably physically abusive as well. She tried to save him, but their marriage broke down. Gig and Liz were married on December 28th of that year. The couple's desire to have children was thwarted by a vasectomy Gig had at the age of 25 due to health problems. He underwent surgery to reverse the vasectomy, but the marriage produced no children. Although their marriage endured for 6 years, it was a stormy union, largely due to the fact that Gig was a chronic alcoholic. Although Liz tried to handle the problem by keeping up drink for drink, this, coupled with the fact that Gig couldn't seem to get over the loss of his second wife, led to the end of their marriage. In January of 1963, Elizabeth went to Mexico for a quickie divorce from Gig. She was then free to marry director-producer William Asher, whom she had met while making the feature film Johnny Cool. By all reports, it was not an easy marriage, with Gig battling ever-growing alcoholism as well as mental issues. Gig was extraordinarily handsome, yet extraordinarily immature for someone his age, suggests Jeffrey Mark. I'm not sure if he was diagnosed as being bipolar, but what I've heard about his behavior sure sounds like it, which meant that Elizabeth was riding an emotional roller coaster being married to him. Up and down, up and down. She didn't want that. She lived that as a child, and sometimes, even though we don't want to, we repeat previous family relationships. Many of us end up with people who remind us of our own parents. It may have been a lucky escape. Young shot his fifth wife to death and then killed himself in a murder-suicide. 9 months after his divorce from Elizabeth Montgomery, Gig Young married real estate agent Elaine Whitman, who was pregnant with Gig's child. Their daughter, Jennifer, was born in 1964, and Gig proclaimed it a miracle, feeling the operations he had undergone had been successful after all. Whitman divorced Gig on November 23, 1966. On September 27, 1978, Gig married his fifth wife, a 31-year-old German named Kim Schmidt, who had been the script girl on his last film, The Game of Death. 3 weeks later, on October 19, 1978, in the Manhattan apartment the newlyweds shared, Gig shot Schmidt in the head, killing her instantly. He then shot himself. The police theorized that it was a suicide pact, but were baffled by the additional 3 revolvers and 350 rounds of ammunition found in the apartment. After the investigation, the police stated Gig had definitely acted on the spur of the moment, and his actions were not planned. No motive was ever discovered.
Do people really who watch the show think you're a witch?
Oh, yes.
Are
Yes.
you serious?
Well, they don't, I don't think. I kind of wish I were sometime. Because it'd be nice to get rid of all those dishes in the sink, you know, as easily as I know you must feel the same way. But it's, people are always saying, like when the Dodgers were in such terrible trouble, you know, if anybody spotted me in the stadium, I'd hear, twitch, twitch, and unfortunately it didn't do us any good.
Number 3, Richard Michaels. Montgomery was best known for playing the wholesome wife with a wild little secret on Bewitched, but everything wasn't quite so wholesome on the set. When guest director Richard Michaels stepped in, he took on 2 roles: TV show director and, shocker alert, lover of the lead actor. As the show progressed, Montgomery carried on an affair with Richard Michaels. Michaels signed on to work as a director on the show during its later seasons and reportedly connected with Montgomery almost instantly. And on a small set like Bewitched, it was going to be next to impossible to keep it a secret. In his blockbuster tell-all, Twitch Upon a Star, author Herbie Pilato outlined the affair, claiming the pair had fallen deeply for each other. The affair between Montgomery and Michaels crashed and burned in a spectacular way. Both Montgomery's husband and Michaels' wife found out about the affair, and both tried to pick up the pieces of marriages broken by cheating. Even though they tried their darndest, neither couple was able to survive. In fact, the 2 marriages ended within a year of each other. Montgomery's affair with Michaels may have been why her marriage to Asher ultimately ended, but it wasn't the first affair during the course of the union. Reportedly, Asher had multiple romances during the 9-year marriage. Pilato notes that Asher slept with a bevy of Hollywood's most elite, and his wedding band never stopped him. Montgomery's affair with Michaels ended the marriage because it was more than physical. Michaels, like so many other men before him, was said to have become infatuated with Montgomery. Elizabeth Montgomery was no different than most stars on long-term TV series. She was feeling bored and looking for a way out. When she hinted to producers that maybe her time on Bewitched was up, she didn't get sympathy or a pep talk. She got money thrown at her. Montgomery continued for a few more seasons just for the cash, and then in season 8 she said stop. Her marriage to the director was over, and she saw no reason to keep playing a character she'd grown tired of. She quit the series that had been her bread and butter for almost a decade. Montgomery and Michaels moved in together when shooting ended in 1972. The relationship lasted 2.5 years.
Any sense at all you would get down on your hands and knees and crawl back to Larry Tate and beg his forgiveness?
Me crawl?
Well, we both know that without him you'd be nothing. He taught you everything you know.
He taught me? Well, that does it. That really does it.
If you'll excuse me, I have to fix dinner.
Well, don't bother setting a place for me because I'll be eating out.
Good. More for me.
And don't bother turning down my side of the bed because I'll be sleeping on the sofa.
As long as you're eating out, why don't you sleep out, too?
Sam, this isn't like you.
Number 2, Bill Asher. When Elizabeth filmed 1963's Johnny Cool, she was working with director William Asher, 12 years her senior, who was also a TV producer and director, and a connection was made. Bill Asher had a very complicated personal life at the time he met Liz. He was separated from his first wife, who was the mother of his children from that marriage. He was directing Liz and Johnny Cool and was having an affair with 3 women at the same time. So Bill, to take the pressure off a little bit, went east after Johnny Cool. He'd already begun to have feelings for Liz and she for him during the filming of the movie. He went east to help create and direct The Patty Duke Show. There, he had a 2-bedroom suite in a hotel. Literally, there were days when he had one woman in one bedroom and somebody else in the other bedroom, and neither lady knew the other one was there. It was almost like a French farce. In walks Liz to all of this, and she tells Bill that she's pregnant. Then, on top of all that, the assassination of President Kennedy takes place. Bill was extraordinarily close to the president. Peter Lawford was his best friend, and Bill had a meltdown. So much so that he was asked to leave the Patty Duke Show. Bill's name was removed from the Patty Duke Show, even though he was co-creator, and he and Elizabeth went back to Los Angeles. To his credit, Jeffrey suggests, Bill gave up the other ladies, and I assure you that all of this is true, because I talked to the ladies and they all confirmed, yeah, this is what was going on. And while he was getting his wind back, he jumped into work again with the Beach Blanket movies with Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello, which he directed, co-produced, and in some cases co-wrote. And then they got the script for Bewitched. Tammy Grimes had been the original person they wanted for the part. A lot of the original concept, as created by Saul Sachs, was very different from what we know as Bewitched, and Bill is the one who came up with the change of point of view, naming the characters differently and sharpening their relationships. They made a pilot, Liz had her baby, and the series was given the green light. And the marriage was very successful for a while. Bill, who had always been a wanderer, felt, despite what anyone will tell you otherwise, Liz was the love of his life, and he gave up being a wild man. They worked very hard together. They had a beautiful home, and they had a beautiful beach house in Malibu. And Liz got pregnant again and again. And according to Bill, they had a great sex life. When Bewitched concluded its run in 1972, largely because Elizabeth was ready to move on, the marriage between her and William Asher was falling apart. There are conflicting views of exactly what was happening. With the success of Bewitched and the films he was directing and producing, Bill became enormously busy, and sometimes one cannot see what's right in front of one's eyes. Liz was becoming unhappy. As much as she appreciated the great success of Bewitched, she saw herself as a multi-talented actor who could do all kinds of things. She felt stifled by the program, so she was creatively unhappy. Bill didn't notice, and because he was so busy, their marriage was beginning to suffer. The other thing is, both Liz and Bill enjoyed having a drink, but Bill was becoming an alcoholic. this was causing more stress in the marriage, as well as the fact that because he didn't need to direct every single episode, he would take time off and do other things. She could not. So by the time Dick York was taken off the show and Dick Sargent took his place, things were not as good as they had been on the set or between them. Bewitched could have gone on longer, but Liz did not want to, and she began having an affair with one of her directors. Despite the success of Bewitched, which had become one of America's top-rated shows, boredom set in after a few seasons, and Montgomery launched into an affair with one of the directors, Richard Michaels, shattering both their marriages in 1971. Elizabeth wasn't the first to stray. Bill told Pilato it was his fault. He had had an affair, he says, noting that her going with that director, Richard Michaels, was nonetheless extremely painful to him. Bill Asher was pissed when that happened. His protege has an affair with his wife? That was tough. So she ends the show and then fills out her contract with ABC with the Mrs. Sundance and Legend of Lizzie Borden TV movies. Jeffrey details Bill's expression of regret that he should have sensed his wife's unhappiness, which was truly driven home when he came home one day to find that Elizabeth's clothing and jewelry were gone. Bill and the children didn't really see Liz for a year, he says. Now, I'm not saying she didn't speak to her children in that year or there weren't any visits, but she was not a full-time mother. She was not in the house, and other than her accountant, nobody really knew where she was. After that year, she wanted to come back to the marriage, but Bill's heart was broken and he felt he couldn't trust her anymore. The damage was done. Bill felt, all these years you've been complaining about your father, and then this is how you behave as a mother? Bear in mind, this is his point of view, not the kids' necessarily. He felt he just couldn't trust her enough to take her back, and in later years regretted that decision. Toward the end of his life, Bill Asher still missed Elizabeth and was crying his heart out for her, saying, "It was all my fault," says Pilato, who befriended Montgomery in her final years. He couldn't get over her. Asher remained deeply connected to her too. He was said to have carried a torch for the bewitched star to his deathbed, years after Montgomery herself passed. According to Pilato, Asher insisted that everything that happened with Montgomery had been his fault. Their marriage came to an end in October of 1974, though it's not a subject that Elizabeth chose to speak to the media about. As she told the New York Daily News, "I don't think people should air their dirty linen in public. Certain things are private."
Elizabeth was wonderful. We worked together for 8 years, and in that time, there was never any problems.
Number 1, Robert Foxworth. In response to everything she'd been through, Elizabeth had more or less sworn off marriage, but not the idea of love in her life. A year earlier, she had starred in the TV film, as previously noted, Mrs. Sundance, which is where she met actor Robert Foxworth. She walked into the rehearsal hall, and it was just immediate, Robert tells Closer. Laughs Herbie. She was intrigued by his name because it matches her father's name, Robert. This is the first guy who's younger than her, and she loves that he's never seen an episode of Bewitched. She falls in love with Robert Foxworth, 9 years her junior, but she doesn't marry him. He's always asking her, "Will you marry me? Will you marry me?" 20 years later, she says, "Okay, let's get married." And he's like, "What?" They were married in 1993. She was still having an affair with Goodoff during that time, but eventually broke up with him. Elizabeth was later diagnosed with cancer and died 18 months after she and Foxworth wed. The attractive, talented Montgomery Foxworth team has survived 19 years, which far exceeds the mean average for most movie-land married couples. "We play significant others in With Murder in Mind," says the erudite Foxworth, best known to viewers for his long-running role in the Falcon Crest series. "This is what we are in our private life. The couple we play is based on real-life characters who were not married at the time the film takes place, nor are they married yet." The same may be said for Foxworth Montgomery, who met some 20 years ago when they co-starred in an earlier TV movie, Mrs. Sundance. They co-starred again 4 years ago in Face to Face, a Hallmark Hall of Fame TV film on location in Africa. "We've appeared together on stage in Love Letters on Broadway, in San Diego and San Francisco, which was great fun," he said. So was their domestic life, according to Foxworth. Elizabeth and I are very happy with our arrangement, he said. We both have children by previous marriages and have no plans for offspring of our own, so we see no reason to change our way of life. In those years with Robert, Elizabeth seemed to have found the inner tranquility that tended to elude her for most of her life. Describes Robert, she was a real homebody. She was a wonderful cook. She liked to work in the garden, and the kids were a huge part of her life. For Elizabeth, she found love and true happiness with Robert, and her career flourished with a wide range of television movies over the decades that allowed her to play a diverse number of characters, tapping into an acting talent that wasn't always given the chance to shine on Bewitched. Sadly, though, it all came to an end on May 18, 1995, at the age of 62, when she died of colon cancer. Says Robert, it was quick, about 7 weeks from diagnosis to her death. She didn't want people crying over her. When it comes to Elizabeth, one particular thought comes to Robert's mind. She would be so happy with her children today. To see them and her grandchildren would have made her proud. Those children are William, 56, Robert, 54, and Rebecca, 51.
Just remember every week I turn around, he was marrying somebody.
That's right. Yeah.
How long did that show run now?
Well, it was on 8 years. I was on it 6 years. I couldn't last out the last 2 years, so I took off. They drowned me or something.
Oh, yeah? It's always amazing. They can still bring you back.
Yeah.
You know, it's so weird. Like, even today, they could call you and go, hey, you know, you were in an air bubble down there.
So, there you have it, guys. The untold secrets of Elizabeth Montgomery's crazy sex life. But before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more Hollywood gossip, and let us know in the comments which scandal surprised you the most. Until next time, stay tuned.